Hey everybody, this is a follow-up on some recent videos. I'm going to be pulling questions and comments from Third Eye Blind Lullaby, Creek Meadow, Most from the Least, the drum mixing video. I don't know, a bunch of different stuff in there. So, hopefully you'll see your question or comment in there come up. So I'm going to start with the Nickel Creek stuff, the episode about Meadow, and I think there was already a follow-up to that video. So this is maybe, it could have been on the original video or it could have been in the follow-up video where this question got posted, but here we go. Okay, so this is from Andrew R. Clarkson Jr., and the message is, this may have actually been a question sent in through the website. It says, Eric, wondering about the difference in the mix recall you did here and what went on the final record. Wondering if it could be related to something like how long a piece of tube equipment had been running, as in how warm it was, or something similar. Thanks for blah, blah. It's an interesting thought, because I felt like when I recalled the Nickel Creek Meadow mix, there was a different way that the mix got summed together. So the recall, I was using my passive summing mixer. The final album mix was using hardware inserts. And so there's potential for things to be different because of that, but also they're wondering about potential differences in the tube gear. There's always potential differences with tube gear. That stuff is notoriously, unreliable at times, and it's always kind of going through this journey of how it can sound different at different times. And there was one thing that I didn't mention that was definitely specifically different, was that in between doing the original mix for the album of the Nickel Creek thing and using the RCA console now, the wonderful team of technical people over at Undertone Audio built a custom power supply for that RCA console, and I replaced the original power supply, which was not great. It was good in how people thought about power supplies back in 1953 or whatever it was, but for a part of a device that is simply trying to supply a stable, consistent, clean DC voltage, we've just gotten way, way better than that, in the last 70 years. And so I replaced it with that. And so some of the plate voltages, I think, are closer to what they're really supposed to be, because that original power supply, even though I had recapped it and done everything that I thought I could to make it really, back to its original spec, once the load of the console was applied to the power supply, those plate voltages would sag quite a bit. And they're supposed to do that under load, but they're not regulated at all. Yeah, no, they're not regulated in the original power supply, and so they would sag quite a bit, and to a place that was considerably lower than what the manual said they should be. And so it was hard to know if that was really part of the intended thing or not, or what. I don't know. But when the replacement power supply went in, the whole console really kind of like perked up and started to sound a lot kind of sturdier and a little clearer. There was definitely less hum, because with the replacement power supply, we were able to do DC for the heaters instead of AC. That's a very problematic way to apply heater voltages. When it's AC, then you have this 60 cycles or 50 cycles if you're in Europe, waveform inside the tube itself. And so it's really, really difficult to eliminate that, from a tube circuit. And on the original power supply, they did it by trying to introduce hum canceling. So they figured out a way in the power supply to have this trim adjustment that would introduce hum that was out of phase with what you were getting from the heaters in the tubes that were receiving an AC voltage. And it works okay, but it definitely doesn't eliminate it. And so, the replacement power supply got the console to just run way more consistently, definitely less hum. There was also a weird ringing 20K thing that disappeared with the, replacement power supply. So that could definitely, contribute to the difference in what was being heard there. And my experience with tube equipment warming up is that it does take a while for that to happen, and I think for some folks probably longer than you would expect or want. I have the most experience with unfair childs, and those things are settling in for a good hour, And the way when I'm using that thing on a mix bus, once I've got it going and I'm in mix mode, I just leave it on, because if you show up in the morning to start working on your mix, what happens is that the unfair child, when you first turn it on, the level will be changing slowly. Just the overall output level of the device will be changing for an hour. It just creeps, just like 1/10 of a dB at a time. And the majority of it happens in the first 5 or 10 minutes, but it does continue to change in a way where if it's on your mix bus or you're mastering with it, it could matter, So that can happen, but once you're past that 1 or 2 hour mark, my experience with tube gear is that it pretty much stabilizes at that point, and it won't change, certainly due to warming up anymore. There are other reasons that tubes change over time. They're just constantly the process of using a tube is slowly destroying the tube. And so there's like this doping material that gets used up on the plate or something. I don't know. It's, I've had it explained to me. I don't remember all the specific, language and details of it. But that is slowly getting used up over time. And then there's a point where the functioning of the tube just sort of breaks down, and, it'll not have the same gain or headroom or whatever. It really sort of collapses and falls apart, and then it's time to change the tube. But leading up to that moment, it's slowly, incrementally, very tiny little changes will happen over time. So it's the nature of tubes. They sound beautiful for certain things. I love them, but it's part of making the choice to use them, is that they change over time. They do, and sometimes they completely fall apart and you got to replace them. So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, it's an interesting thought in that whole question there. Okay, so this is more on the Meadow episode, and these were all questions, comments that came in through the website. Okay, so this one is from Jones Tones Inc. Okay, yeah, this is interesting. I remember this one now. So this person plays upright bass professionally, a lot of experience playing and recording it, and so he's offering a trick to address one of the problems that I was having in the mix of the Meadow video. And so the trick is use the DI before the delay to trigger, because I think he's commenting, I delayed the DI to get it more in phase with the microphones. So use the DI before the delay to trigger an expander on it. And I think it being probably the microphone signals. You can mitigate a lot of bleed this way. With Pro MB, you can make the side chain and affected frequencies specific as well. So similar, I think, I was automating, an EQ move to get rid of the sort of bright part of the bleed that was coming into the upright bass. And so what he's suggesting is using the DI, which is super clean, in theory won't have any bleed of any consequence, to trigger either a multi-band thing like FabFilter Pro MB or an expander or something. So the mic just opens up only when it's playing. And it can very accurately do that if you use the DI as a source. It's a good idea, and I will definitely consider doing that next time and not have to automate my way through it. It's a very, very cool suggestion. So thank you for that there, Jones Tones Inc. Okay, so now we have one from Louis Couturier. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm doing my best on that. Okay. So and this is a question about phasing. It says for phasing fine tuning, do you usually prefer doing it by ear or straight away with tools like Auto Align 2 and get the most optimized phase possible? Generally, I do this stuff by ear. There are now circumstances that I can anticipate, like this is going to be a very complex combination of stuff. And so this was on the bass mic, the bass DI and mics, where you have three elements, all of which are going to have their own sort of peculiar phase issues that are probably complicated enough where it's going to spread, the phase issues will spread across the spectrum in different ways. Like when you have a mic on a bass at the bridge and one on an upper lobe, they're just very, very different perspectives on what the bass is in relation to phase. And so in that instance, I decided this is too complicated for me to just try and fuss around with delaying things and get all three of these things to line up together. I'm just going to try this auto align thing and let it sort it all out and see what it comes up with. And the results were good. Yeah, so this is in reference to the Lullaby bass recording. That's what I'm guessing. And so, but ultimately, definitely, always my ear is the final judge. And so, I'm very clear about what it feels like when things are in phase and things are all pulling together in the same direction. And I'm pretty sensitive to it. And so, after I applied that auto-aligned phase adjustment to things, I listened to it quite a bit, bypassing all three of them on and off so I could hear with and without to make sure, is this really making things better? And that plugin, most of the time, I think, does a really great job and makes great choices in how to do that. But it hasn't always been the best choice. And so I definitely always listen to it and don't just assume, that, okay, now all the phase is great. Because, an algorithm's judgment on making the phase great could be different than what I actually want to hear or feel come out of the speakers. But that's generally how I do it. Definitely with the delay stuff, I'm always just moving around the delay, listening to it without it, and just seeing how it feels come out of the speakers, and that it feels like everything is really pushing in the same direction. And it has a certain sensation to it where it's just like clearer and punchier and kind of more solid, and there aren't these like weird hollow notes in there. So yeah, lot of listening, but it's a great question. Okay, so then we have a question from username Edwin Starr, and so this is talking about using tape machines. And so they're saying, I started experimenting with putting tracks to a tape machine. This is an Otari 5050. And back into the DAW. The gain in texture, sizzle, and density is really amazing. I agree. I still love tape machines. You mentioned in another video that you raise highs before the tape and then reduce them once back in the DAW to lower hiss. Can you explain a bit more how you do it? Is there a specific EQ curve you use for this process? Do you just put a high shelf at 10K, or do you use a tilt EQ that lowers the bass? Many thanks for the video. Okay, so my approach to this is not really like just for the purpose of doing what people commonly call a pre-emphasis. And so a pre-emphasis EQ would be something that's what you described, where you intentionally put an EQ before a certain processing, and then afterwards you do the reverse of it to sort of undo the EQ, and whatever that processing is becomes more sensitive to however you pre-emphasized it. And that's not specifically how I approach it. So my approach is that if I have a sound that I want to put through the tape machine at a certain point in the process, whether I'm recording directly to it or I have something that's in the computer that's going to run through it and go back into the computer, whenever in the process it's happening, basically my approach is that as I'm anticipating EQ moves that I want to do to whatever this thing is, if I know I want to boost some high end on this, I will choose to do whatever that EQ move is that I want to do. I'll do it before the tape machine instead of choosing to do it after. And so it isn't really sort of like a global blanket, I'm just going to always boost a shelf at 10K. It's really specific to what I'm working on. And if I have source material that I know I'm going to want to boost some low end on, like if it's a kick drum sound that's going to go through the tape machine, and you do these, there's a pretty common move that you do with kick drums for a more modern approach is pull out some low mids, add some highs for a more aggressive attack, add a bunch of lows that are focused in to make the kick drum really punchy and heavy sounding. So like those three moves generally will happen a lot on a modern kick drum. And so what I'll do is I will do the two moves going to the tape machine, which are boosting the highs and removing the low mids. And then I can get a lot more level on the tape, and it forces the tape, the saturation to the tape, to be more sensitive to whatever that boost is that I do on there. And then after it comes back from the tape machine in the computer, then I'll boost the low end. Because if I do that before the tape machine, it just it reduces how much level I can put on the tape by a lot, by a huge amount. And so it's just a loss of headroom. And so that's really more what it's about, is like anticipating what EQ moves I'm gonna do. And sometimes I have the luxury of even monitoring it. So I'll put the tape machine and record, it's playing back off of repro, and I'm listening to it in the computer. I'll do my high frequency boost and my low mid cut going to the kick drum. It comes back to the computer. I'll put an EQ on it there in the computer and do my low end boost. So I really am hearing the whole end result in real time, sending to the tape and ultimately the low end boosting that I would do afterwards. And you can really dial it in really great. Capture it, back into the computer. You can continue to refine whatever your low frequency move is, but that's what it's about. Incorporating the EQ moves that I would be doing anyways on this device into the right stages of processing with when you're incorporating analog tape. Boosting mids and highs before the tape, and only boosting or trying to only boost lows and stuff after the tape. So it's more about that. It's not like a blanket thing. So hopefully that helps clarify how I'm approaching that, and it's been hugely helpful for me. I get way more out of the tape machine, I think, with it softening and saturating the ranges of frequencies that I think really benefit from it, and also minimizing the amount of hiss that you're going to get off the thing. So there it is. Good question. Okay, username CD Badger, like that. I've never encountered the difference between a trustworthy or untrustworthy badger. So this is again on the Meadow mix. There's a few questions as I watch. The idea to put flanging across. Okay, and there's a couple questions about this. A couple people asked about this. I'll be able to answer it for both here. Question. Okay, the idea to put flanging across both sides of the room mics is so great. What were you using to do that? Okay, so here's the first part. I was using the Eventide Instant Flanger Mark II plugin to do it. And I actually ran into a little bit of complication for the recall of this, for filming the video about it, was that on the original mix, I used the Mark I. And I would have stuck with that for the original mix, but there wasn't an installer that would install on the latest versions of whatever. And so I couldn't get it to work. And so I had to use the Mark II, and it lost my settings when I had to switch it to that. So I had to recreate the settings by ear on there, and I think I got it pretty much the same. But that's what I ended up using, and I apologize that I didn't actually, clearly I didn't pull them up and show what it was. But this is what it was. And I had it, on a pretty slow oscillation speed, feedback. Yeah, oscillator rate was set pretty slow, and I had this set pretty high. So this thing is probably adjusting just sort of an overall delay, and so it changes what frequency range is really being emphasized by the flanging. And so I had it set high. I wanted it to be really kind of up higher in the really sort of airy, wispy realm of frequencies that were being affected by the flanging. And so I think it made it a little more subtle and subliminal in there. And then a little bit of bounce, not too much of that. That can also draw a little too much attention to it if you have the bounce turned up too much. When it's changing direction in the oscillation, it'll do this like sort of warp in it. But it's a beautiful sounding phase. They did an incredible job. I think, the Mark II actually is closer to the hardware, which I owned for a long time. I ended up selling it at a certain point because it just, kept needing to get fixed and was never really working when I needed it to. And the plugin does a great job. It sounds beautiful. So I really enjoy that, and I also enjoy the other one that I tried when I was doing this was Waves Meta Flange, or Meta Flange was the other one that I tried, and they're both really, really good for this sort of thing, but the Instant Flanger won out. Okay, and then the next part of his question was, I noticed a lot of the multi-tap delays were set to the same or really similar times across different instruments. Is that just because you drag the plugins across? Yes. Or were those times intentionally kept similar so their timing works well together? Yeah, there wasn't a specific reason to do it. I was sort of duplicating that delay. That one really worked the best for getting the effect of extending the decay of the room time. I came up with delay times that seemed to do it in a way where, because I didn't really want to hear the repetitions of delays, I just wanted to hear a longer reverb, and the way those two delays sort of repeated out with their feedback seemed to sort of disguise that they were delays, and so I just kept it and moved it around the different tracks. It seemed to work. If for some reason it stuck out and didn't work on a particular thing, then I've changed it, but for the most part, it did. So yeah, your guess there was right. I was just dragging it around and it kept working. Okay, yeah, these last bits are more just comments. And so make a comment that it was nice to hear about the details of about the panning on the ensemble melody, that there were two mics that were used and the processing and how all that got panned to sort of present it in a way that worked in the context of the mix. And, that it would be nice to talk more about panning choices. I agree that it often gets overlooked, and it's really, really important. It's such a powerful tool, in the mixing process to be able to get everything to find its place in there. So yeah, I'll try and, always make an effort to highlight that, or even do a specific video just specifically about panning and, how I approach it in various ways. And then there was one more part about the RCA console, and if I would consider doing a plug-in version of that, I would love to do that. I'm continuing to dig deeper into that world, finding more people to collaborate with. I don't write code, don't know how to do that, and trying to see what directions I can go in to get the results that I want. But I've really enjoyed it so far, and excited about trying to explore that further and see what I can come up with to try and contribute something of true value to the world. There's just so much out there, and so many really, really brilliant people, focusing a lot of, energy and attention on it. So there's a lot of great plugins out there. If I'm going to do something, I want to do something that really, brings something valuable to the landscape. So I just got to make sure I can do that. But yeah, I would love to do that. It's a beautiful sounding piece of equipment. So now there was just a general question that came in about the SRE 555. This is the chorus echo that I use. Let's see, the comment and question is, on a couple of these videos, you send the vocal to an outboard chorus echo. What approximate delay times do you shoot for to give the vocal depth without burying it too much in the track? So that's a good question. I apologize. Often that gets actually printed in on its own track, and so I don't have recall details for it that I can easily pull up. But the delay time usually ends up in the 200 to 300 millisecond range. The feedback, I usually set it kind of as long as it will go before it starts to just run away with itself. And then the way it gets balanced is I turn the reverb all the way up, and I just bring in the delay, because the delay signal on a chorus echo feeds to the reverb. And so it's very similar to what was happening with the delay on the room mics. I'm using the delay to try and extend the length of the spring reverb. And so I turn up the delay level just a little bit. It's probably right around 9 o'clock, and the reverb level is all the way up. And so the delay is really kind of just drenched in reverb, and it's just sort of extending out the length of the spring reverb. So that's typically how it's set, somewhere between 200 to 300 milliseconds. That seems to be a delay time that doesn't draw as much attention to itself as a delay, and is long enough to really give me a nice, long, luxurious decay time on the reverb. So that's generally how to do it. If you set it anywhere in there, you'll get basically the same result that I've been getting with it. And I love that sound. It's so cool. Okay, so now this is, I think this came in through the contact on the website. And this is a general question about using tape. And so it says that they're interested in getting into using tape. And then he says, the thing is, everyone who has worked on tape seemed to want to warn about the hassle and constant headaches of working on tape. My issue is that no one ever goes in depth about what the hassle is all about, or even how to overcome the hassle. So I'm asking you, do you know of any good resources to learn about working with tape for someone who's grown up in the digital age? And have you ever considered making a Working on Tape 101 video? I have thought about that. I want to do it. It's on the list. I'm definitely going to do that. I think it could really help younger engineers to want to work on tape. Also, my favorite video of yours. Okay, yeah, it's some stuff about videos. Okay, yeah, said some kind stuff there. Thanks for the kind words. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick rundown of what the pitfalls are and what the hassles are, because tape machines, it's a complicated device, and it takes a little bit of patience and attention and diligence to keep them running and keep them happy. So, first of all, if you buy a tape machine now, it's likely that it's going to have some issues. A lot of them are very old and, will have aging components in them, or have been worn down or worn out or whatever. And getting stuff fixed and working properly can be very challenging. Some of the parts aren't available anymore. There's a limited number of people out there that know how to fix them anymore. It's not easy. So you can definitely find yourself in a position where you buy a tape machine and you can't really get it entirely working anymore. So that's something to be wary of. If you're gonna purchase a tape machine, do your best to get something that has been well maintained and there's, a degree of confidence that something's gonna arrive that works. Because if it doesn't, you could really be stuck depending on where you are and what kind of technical resources you have access to. So fair warning about that. Once you get your tape machine, you got to really get the most out of it, you need to know how to calibrate it. One of the things that you need to properly calibrate a tape machine is what's called an MRL tape, Magnetic Reference Laboratories. They make these specific calibration tapes that you use to make sure your tape machine is being calibrated in a way that's fully optimized. And it's very challenging to do it without an MRL tape. What the MRL tape is it's a tape where they've recorded tones on it at a very specific known level. So you can put that on your machine and see where it's playing back and be able to get all of the playback calibration exactly right. Because if you don't do that, when you start calibrating your machine, you don't know if it's an error on the record side or the playback side. One side has to be known to be accurate, or you're literally just randomly turning stuff to try and make it, record and play back accurately. And you can really get it wrong. You can, have not enough high end calibrated in on the record side and making up the difference on the playback side. What you're going to get is a recording that has a lot of high frequency hiss in it, and so you got to get an MRL tape. MRL still exists. They're still making very reliable. I just bought a new round of them, as I'm getting my machines going again. My MRL tapes were decades old. They were getting sticky. They were getting worn out. I couldn't use them anymore. Fair warning, they're not cheap. This the market for analog tape has diminished so much for the people that are still in it trying to make a living doing it and supporting it. You know, they have to raise the price to make it viable to actually, you know, work for them financially. So they're pretty expensive and potentially more than the tape machine you buy at this point, because some tape machines are being sold very cheap, but the MRL tape might be more than the tape machine. But I think that's probably unlikely, but not impossible. So look at it. You can, if you search Magnetic Reference Laboratory, you'll find their website. You can go on there and find the pricing for it. The website is a little tricky to navigate. It's kind of complicated. It took me a second to get through there. They have this crazy like code system for figuring out what tape you need. You know, they have some that have like the part numbers already figured out in advance that are sort of the most common ones that you would need. So it's safest to go with one of those. I did some custom ones and it took a little while to figure out how to come up with the part number, but it's possible, and they still make great tapes. It works great. I got one for, you know, that I'm using with the Scully and the MM1200. I got a new one for my half-inch machine, and so I can get all those like super dialed in, working the way they're supposed to. Okay, so there's that. You got to keep your tape machines clean and demagnified, and so you got to keep a box of cotton swabs around, and use, you know, I use like scientific grade isopropyl alcohol. You can buy it from scientific supply places. So you got to find that, get yourself some cotton swabs. And, you know, anytime I'm about to do something very important with the tape machine, I just make a point of going and cleaning off the heads. And you'll see a little bit of oxide on there, you know, it's a little brown on your Q-tip, you know, when you scrub it off. And it just ensures that it's going to be performing the way you want, you know. Particularly with more recent batches of tape, the analog tape itself is, I would say, everyone would agree, is not of the same degree of quality that it was back in the, you name it, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, all that. Started to degrade once you got into the 2010s is when I first started, mid-2000s is when I first started having issues with analog tape. Huge issues with it on the All-American Rejects record. It was kind of a nightmare. And so the issue there was that the tape was shedding. That's the term that they use for the oxide that wears off of the tape and will get deposited on the heads or different parts of the mechanism of the transport. That's what you have to clean off with a cotton swab and isopropyl alcohol. But the way the tape was shedding, it was shedding these tiny little slivers of oxide that were getting stuck in between the different tracks of the head, the little head gaps in there. And it was causing some sort of weird problem where it would just, the high-end playback would get degraded somehow and just fall down a lot, like in a way I've never seen on a tape machine before. I'd been using tape machines for decades leading up to that, never seen it do that, and it did it just in the most aggravating way when I was trying to finish that All-American Rejects record, where I was so nervous about it because that whole album was mixed to analog, half-inch analog tape, and that's where I was running into the problem. I was at Bernie Grundman mastering that record with Bernie Grundman, and we were both freaking out. Just like, I've never seen this happen before. It was a total nightmare. And so I would do a pass, you know, a mastering pass of a song and get to the end, have to put the tones reel up again and check to see if it had lost high frequency playback. And it would. Then I'd have to clean it again, run the thing again. It was a disaster. It was such a problem. But eventually I got it done in a way that I was confident about. So the tape is not as great as it used to be. I haven't had that problem as much recently as I did back on that particular project. And that tape was MTech SM900 is what I was using on that project. And that was this, you know, it could have been specific to that batch, that era, or whatever. Something happened. Making tape is not easy. It's a complicated chemical manufacturing process where everything's got to be just right, you know. And so I haven't experienced it in that way since then. It seems to be much more stable in the stuff that I've bought recently, but there's that. The other thing is that analog tape in general has gotten quite expensive. Let's see if I can pull up some pricing here. Okay, there's a place called Analog Tapes. It's a gentleman that has created a website, he's sort of dedicating himself to supporting the world of analog tape recording. And so this gentleman has MRL tapes that you can buy that he's already ordered from MRL, and then you buy it off of his site. That can be handy, so you don't have to try and figure out the part number and all that. Let's say you get a 2-inch machine. Okay, he's selling used tape on here. I probably would not do that at this point. I wouldn't choose to do that. Maybe this stuff's okay, but I mean, 996 has not been made for a very long time, and I've transferred. I did a whole archiving thing with all my entire catalog of stuff, and even the 996. I did my transfers in probably 2021, 2022. Had definitely gotten sticky, and so the chances of getting some used tape that is decades old hasn't degraded, I think, are very slim. And so let's look at what we got in the new category. Okay, so here's some new stuff. Some sort of new version of what was M-Tech, and so the company is now called RTM. And so, a 10.5-inch reel, so that gives you some, just about 16 and a half minutes of record time at 30 IPS is $430 a reel. That's not cheap, The way I use it, I keep re-recording over it. There are complications there, and I feel like you can do that for quite a long time. I've had tape up on my machine for a year and just keep recording over it. So you can get a lot of usage out of this. If you're a healthy machine that handles the tape well and isn't tearing it up and wearing it down faster than normal, you can use it for a long time. Erasing the tape is a little bit of an issue. A lot of the old tape machines don't erase the signal 100%. You probably saw me make reference to that in the Third Eye Blind Lullaby video when I was doing my print pass. I do an extra erase pass before I do the print pass because the erasure accumulates as you do it over and over again. And so you got to consider that, if you're reusing your tape, you have to, depending on how well your machine erases, clear off a section of tape to erase whatever you recorded on there the last time, and then record your stuff through the tape and capture it back into the computer, however, whatever you're doing with it. So there's that. So, those are some of the things that would be, I think, difficult to really anticipate if you've never worked with tape machines before. There's a lot going on there. I go back and will recheck the calibration on my machines sort of at the beginning of any significant round of using it. So if I'm on a new project and I'm about to be printing a bunch of stuff from my tape machine, let's go check the calibration again. That means put the MRL tape on, make sure everything's playing back accurately, take that off, get a reel that's, I can record on, put that on, rewind to the beginning, set up tones that are going to the machine, make sure all the tones are going there at the right level. I have a Pro Tools session that's set up to do that. That's generally easy. Everything will show up, hit record, check 1K, check 10K, check 15K, check 100 hertz, check 50 hertz. I have notes on tape machines, a specific frequency that will get me to the most sort of balanced, frequency response on something. And then once you get through all of that, okay, now I'm 100% sure nothing's changed on this machine and I'm ready to use it and it's going to, perform reliably. I will say, so all of that probably sounds a bit daunting. I will say that, my machines are really quite stable. I put some effort into refurbishing them on the Scully. I had help from a technician named David Anderson. We replaced a bunch of pots and capacitors and did a bunch of stuff on that. That thing is running very reliably. And most of the time when I go and check the calibration, it's like, no, cool, everything still looks good. Maybe a couple tiny adjustments, but nothing that would have ruined the use of it. Same thing with the MM1200. you know. With that machine, I did the refurbishing myself, and when I go and recheck the calibration, it's being very stable. And so there are times when I want to do something really quick where I won't even bother checking the calibration. Just like, I'm sure this thing's close enough. Hit record, run something through it, sounds great, here we go. So, you know, it's a whole other world. It's hard to anticipate really what's involved in that. But I think the rewards are worth it, certainly for me. I love it. You know, it makes things sound like so much closer to what my ears are used to hearing and saves me work on things. So it's worthwhile. I think it saves me enough time that it's worth the effort to put into it. So there's an overview of it. I would love to do a video where I actually show what all of these processes are, the calibration, the demagnetizing the heads. I'm going to have to correct that earlier. I think I said it wrong, demagnifying. That's not how it said. It's demagnetizing. But yeah, I think it's worth it. There you go. I'll do a video that shows all of those processes and all that stuff. You can get a better sense of really what it is. All right, moving on. Great question. Okay, so this was a comment about Subkick delaying the sub information on a kick drum. And this is from username Malacliche, I think, something like that. And so the comment is, let's see, I've used the delayed kick sub trick every time since learning about it forever ago on my channel. I've been definitely talking about it for a while. I can't imagine not using it. Seems essential. How did you learn this and when? So I've talked about this before, lost somewhere in some videos in the past, but where this came from was that early on I got in the practice of setting up a kick mic that was further away from the kick drum. And I started to notice that when I used that microphone for low end for the kick drum, that somehow it was just better and just cooler sounding than using just the low end that was attached to whatever mic was right up on the kick drum. And so in there, it wasn't totally clear what was great about it, because obviously the sound that you're capturing from a mic that's 5, 6, 10 feet away from the kick drum is going to be dramatically different than a mic that's 6 inches away from the kick drum. And so it could have just been that. But I started to realize at a certain point that there was something about the delay, you know? And so when you have a mic that's like 10 feet away, that low-end information is arriving 10 milliseconds later. And there was something about that that was really cool. And so then I started doing it in a more intentional way. It's like, if the delay is what's cool about it, then I can take, you know, low-end information that's part of this same, all of this stuff that's arriving at the same time, and just delay it, and maybe that'll make it better. And you know, so it started to really reveal itself that that was really a cool way to treat the low end. So it was that, and I think theorizing at a certain point, just, you know, just the way my years doing hip hop stuff. I worked with an artist named Paris and did a lot of hip hop stuff where there was using 808s and combining different kick samples and stuff, that there was this thing about delaying the really sub frequencies, even within an 808 sound itself, because that sample bends down in pitch when you hit it. So it starts higher and bends down. So inherently the sub frequencies arrive later. And it was a way of spreading out the information of the kick drum that allows you to have more low end without giving up headroom, without having to sacrifice so much headroom. So that was conceptually, you know, how I started to think about it, started to doing it more intentionally, and it really was reinforced by my experiences using microphones that were further away for low end on the kick drum. So that all of those things sort of combined to be like, whoa, this is important. This is a very useful thing. So there you go. Good question. Okay, so now we've got, this is stuff about the Lullaby Mix, a deconstruction video. So I think this first stuff came off of YouTube. This is username William Samuels 2980. And okay, so this is 30 minutes in, but a question and a critique. It's a little hard to see the details of the Pro Tools screen, but it appeared to me that you don't have the Saturn plugin on your parallel Sans amp distorted drum tracks. wouldn't this cause some phase issues around the 200 hertz crossover point that the Saturn is set to? Yeah, you're totally right. I looked at the session again, and the tracks where I'm using the SansAmp are actually the version of that's just being used for the toms. And so it would have been much more of an issue, I think, if I had parallel tracks that were running the whole time being blended in with the original ones, and they didn't have the Saturn plug-in with the crossovers, because all kinds of crazy phasing stuff happens there if you don't turn on linear phase, which I hadn't. I went back and checked. And so this was affecting how those tom signals were blending with the original stuff, which were really supposed to be additive to that. And I even remember when I was working on that mix that there was something about the way they were blending in that didn't feel like they were fully leaping out in the way that I was expecting them to. And I think this is probably why. I think you caught it. So yeah, and normally if I was only going to have the FabFilter Saturn on one thing, and I was trying to blend it with something else that didn't have it, I would definitely just hit linear phase, and then they do line up, all the phasing will line up accurately. So yeah, so you did identify something there that I definitely screwed up, but it wasn't across. I think it would have been more obvious, and I probably would have caught it and addressed it if it was something that was running in parallel to the main, speaker, room mic signals that were running through the whole song that were really like the drum sound. If I had something running in parallel to that had phasing anomalies, it's likely it would have been more audible. But it was only when the toms were hitting, and I totally missed it. So maybe I'll check and see how much of a difference that might have actually made. But the toms were a little darker. I was expecting them to pop out a little more, but who knows? Maybe it's cooler that way. You never know. So, but good eye there, and nice catch. And then there's another comment here. I'm noticing that the Pro Tools output is considerably lower in volume than your lav mic, maybe because you bypassed the master bus. It was tricky on this one. There's a screw up in the lav mic. The batteries ran out on one of the packs that I used for that, and so I couldn't use my actual lav mic. So the dialogue audio that you're hearing for the whole first half of that is actually audio from the iPhone, and I did my best to try and get some of the noise out of there and try and make it sound okay, but the whole thing, it was much more difficult to get that right. And yes, turning off the limiter dropped the level of everything. I was just going to volume everything up in Adobe Premiere. I don't know. I could have done a better job. I apologize that it just wasn't balanced as good as it usually was. And so I'll try and do better on the next one. Okay, so then we have one from Drew Leclerc, 1281. Is it? Okay, so this is another critique, and it says, I totally get the sonic reasoning behind the choice, but if I may, as soon as Steven started to sing into that 251, I welled up because it was such an immediately recognizable and signature nostalgic sound. I said out loud, there it is, when I heard it. I'd be willing to bet others might share that sentiment. That voice singing through that microphone flooded me with so many positive feelings and memories. The immediate cut to him singing on the 44 almost felt comical. Yet that's good, but we didn't do that. Ha ha. I can appreciate the choice and understand the potential thought process of not living in the past and or always trying different things. But man, I could have cried hearing Stephen Jenkins singing through that 251. And I totally appreciate and enjoy all feedback or criticism. And I get what you're saying. I just, in the moment, I think I'll say this, that if his voice was exactly the same as it was in 1996, I would have been more inclined to just use that mic and not question it. His voice has changed quite a bit in the 28 years that has passed. It's just been a lot of road wear and making records and singing all the time and all that stuff, and just the undeniable the inescapable effects of age as we all age. And so his voice now has a slight sort of vocal fry kind of edginess to it that I found the 251 to not be quite as flattering for. And that's really what compelled me to make the change. I was expecting to love the 251. It always worked amazing on him. But when I heard his voice through it now, I immediately wanted to hear something else. So I don't know. That was my sort of just impulse in the moment, and ultimately, especially on the second mix version, when I wasn't trying to like hype it up beyond what it originally was. I loved the sound of his voice through that microphone. I think it really was beautifully flattering on there, what his voice is now. And so I think given the choice again, I would probably still make the same choice, but I totally understand and appreciate where you're coming from. You know, it's been a long-standing great combination for him, and who knows, maybe it would have been better. I was happy with it the way it was, but there's always that chance that it could have been better. So I appreciate the feedback. All right, moving on. We've got... Okay, so this is from username Oceanside Recording Studio. So this is just a general thing about YouTube versus my website. I do like to just address these when they come up. You know, people are trying to navigate this whole YouTube thing and me starting a website and all that. So the comment is, why advertise this on YouTube when you could just send a notification to the people who signed up to your website? Is this channel just for advertising now? And so I totally get it. I appreciate the comment. I can only imagine it's somewhat annoying to have a video notification come up and want to go and watch this video, yet it's not really the video. It's just saying like, hey, there's a video that you can watch. And so I understand that. If I only sent out notification to the people that have, become members on the website, there's not really an opportunity for me to expand this thing. And I'm still trying to encourage people to, make the leap of faith from YouTube onto the website. I'm hopeful that people will want to do that and understand and want to support what I'm trying to do with it. If I can get more people to sign up for the website, it'll open up so many opportunities. I've talked about it before. I would love for that to happen and to be able to bring just more deeper, more expansive experiences and content, to the website. It would really allow me to do that. So, and, I get how frustrating that might be for people that are, really enjoy on YouTube being able to go and just click on stuff that's free all the time. There's so much of it on there and tons of great stuff that's available there. I try to flag it right out of the gate. I put this big red-orange banner on there that says highlights. People know this is not the actual video. This really is just letting you know it's available on the website. And if you're not into that, I totally respect that, and you can just skip it. Whenever you see that red and orange banner on something, you don't have to go there because it's not going to be the whole thing. So I'm doing my best. I'm trying to make it work for everybody. I appreciate everybody that's joining me on the website. It's been great having you there. I'm going to try and continue to invite people to join us over there, and hopefully it'll continue to grow. That would be awesome. All right, so moving on. Here we go. Okay, my question is pertaining to the low end. I've noticed when mixing, I have to have a lot of low end boosted on my speakers so I can easily get a better understanding of what's happening down there. Do you find yourself needing more low end while mixing? Okay, so the voicing of speakers, the speakers that I listen to are definitely not flat. They have extra low end in them because it's the way I enjoy listening to music. And so I don't specifically add low end to the speakers for the purpose of being able to hear more low end and potentially hear more detail in what's going on. I add more low end to the speakers because it's how I like to hear music. And the idea is that when I'm listening to music in my room that has been made by other people from whatever decade. I want to just be able to turn up the speakers and just go, oh, that feels incredible. I love the way this sounds. And so ultimately, I can trust that same feeling when I'm turning up music or a mix that I'm working on those same speakers. In theory, I should be able to turn up the thing that I'm working on, and if I have that same sensation of, that just feels amazing, I love the way that sounds, it should sound right. So that's really what I base it on. And it's nothing more scientific than that. It's just how I like to hear it. When I've had speakers that are super, super flat in front of me, just like with an accurate test, microphone and whatever, and everything's super, super flat, it's just not that fun for me to listen to. It feels a bit shrill in the room, even with great speakers. And I'm sure I could get used to it, but I don't want to. I want to just have it come on and feel like this is super awesome and fun to listen to. So that's what I do. And, interesting that this come up, I've been living with the Strauss monitors and where I ended up. They are unchanged from where I ended up. I believe it was episode 28. It was like the final whatever, end of the rainbow, the end of the rainbow, when I finally committed to how I was going to EQ those things and have it be really done. And so I've been using them since then, and it's only in the last maybe few weeks or so I'm feeling like I'm going to make a small adjustment. And I think it is that I'm going to turn down a little bit of that low-end boost that I put on my speakers, because I'm finding that as I take stuff out and around, I want to be voicing it with a little bit more low end when the mix leaves my room. And that's really how you got to think about speakers. I've seen people make this mistake that, like, I'm going to put a bunch of low end in my speakers so I have a bunch of low end in my mixes, and you're going to get the opposite result. If you EQ your speakers with a lot of low end, you will be less inclined to add it to your mix because it's in what you're monitoring. So, there is a give and take there. And so I'm probably, when I get back to Vermont, when I get back there in June, I will be there for the rest of the summer. So coming up here pretty soon, I'll be fully Vermont, and it'll be all about Sonic Forest and what's going on there. I'm going to finish a second Most from the Least video before I leave here. Make sure I get that done before I go. I'm excited about the next one. And so, when I get back there, I'm probably going to make this little adjustment. I'll do a lot of listening, re-graph the response, see how if anything has changed or something or whatever, just make sure I see what I'm doing and make a little tweak there moving forward. That'll invite me to leave a little more low end in. I think I need to do that. So there you go. That's how I think about it. Good question. This is a comment, like a added detail, or as they call it, a rectification from Floating Point Audio, High Floating Point. The former Abbey Road engineer's name is Peter Cobbin. So I made reference to this at some point. Oh, we were talking about it in the Warren Brown thing. He was talking about Peter. He's Australian. He worked from 1995 to 2010 as the chief engineer at Abbey Road Studios. So just a little additional detail about him. And, he's incredible. I've never met him myself, but everybody agrees that he is just hopelessly obsessed with audio and has really innovated a bunch of really cool stuff. Okay, so then we've got username Cody Roberts. And they're saying, would love to see a breakdown for your mixes with the story so far. I'd love to do that. I'm planning on it. I'm trying to find a time to connect with either or both Sam Pura and the band themselves. I wasn't involved with the recording of it. I only did the mix, and so it would be cool to incorporate some of the information about how things were recorded, just get a more complete picture of what's going on there. They're very cool recordings. Sam, I think, did an amazing job capturing, a very, very cool band. So it'd be cool to just get that side of it as well. So I'm trying to organize all of that. Had some email communication and just trying to figure out a time to get it all sync up. So that'll happen in the future. I'm excited to do it. Cool. Okay, so then we have from username Chris Dover 8507. Could you please tell me how you mentally handle mistakes in your own work? I recently sent out a mix where the bass guitar was so loud that any boombox designed by humans would have just not coped. This is devastating and embarrassing, and I only ever seem to be as happy as my last mix. I can mix 10 great songs and mix only one with errors, yet I feel like a complete failure. Is this just something that goes on forever? I also have periods where my choices and placements are so clear-cut. Then I have periods of questioning everything I'm supposed to know. I think everybody goes through stuff like this. I certainly do, and I've certainly made plenty of mistakes, for sure. They're out there. And, you know, I think this is part of a broader question about how to approach life in general. And, you know, it definitely takes center stage when you're, you know, committing yourself to being a creative entity. And so, you know, making mistakes is definitely just part of it. It happens all the time. And I consider a mistake, you know, is something that's different than a compromise. A compromise is something that is not what I want, but I know about it. I'm aware of it. A mistake is something that you find out after the fact that you didn't know you didn't want, and it's like, oh shit, that's how that happened? Okay, oops. And so being unaware of it when you're working on it. And I think mistakes can potentially be more destabilizing because it's the not knowing is what can really, really fuck with your trust and confidence in yourself. And when you go back to dig in to do something, it's like, am I going to end this process again thinking I got everything right, but something's not? That can be very, very destabilizing. But, you know, I like to approach life, whether it's creative or otherwise, in every aspect of my life, trying to be as honest and connected with everything about myself, the things that I feel like I might be pretty good at and the things that I'm not good at, that I could be better at, the things that I've screwed up, and really, really accept all of it. And I think in your comment, the fact that you're willing to recognize and even articulate in really colorful terms how that bass thing got screwed up, being able to just admit and identify it is already a very empowering thing, I think. There are some folks that would try to pretend that it never happened. And that's the most poisonous of all, because you're missing an opportunity to make an improvement or make a change in life that will create the opportunity to not make that mistake again. And, you know, so mistakes are a double-edged sword. You gotta like admit it, which is painful. It's hard to admit when you fucked something up, and I've done it plenty. But I gotta say, the more comfortable I've gotten with admitting it, every time I do, I feel this sort of like, this just like exhale, this release of burden and anxiety about it. It's like, okay, I admitted it, it's out there, everybody knows, it's just part of who I am. And overall, I'm comfortable with who I am. You know, I've got plenty of flaws and plenty of shit I screw up all the time, and I've accepted that about myself. It's okay. None of us are perfect, you know. As much as I'd like to be, I always strive for it. Rarely, or really in reality, never get there. And the thing that's cool about mistakes, so like that's the hard part about mistakes, is having to admit them when they happen. But I think admitting them is always better. Trying to pretend that they didn't happen or sweep them under the rug is just, you're not being honest with yourself. And it also misses the opportunity, you end up missing the opportunity to get the benefit from mistakes. And the benefit from a mistake is learning something new, which is what I'm all about. If I was always perfect all the time in everything that I did, recording shit, it would be boring, and I wouldn't want to continue doing it. It's like, okay, another perfectly executed thing, you know? And I'm in this because I'm still learning shit and growing and evolving as an engineer, a mixer, a producer, a sort of a musical entity, a songwriter, like all those things. I'm still learning stuff. That's why I love showing up every day, because there's an opportunity that the mistakes that I made in the past are going to inform new ways to do things that's going to make it better the next time I do it. That's fucking exciting. So that's how I feel about it, how I live with it, how I try and grow from it and actually benefit from it. It's always uncomfortable to be faced with a mistake or something that you didn't do the way you wanted to. But if you're going to suffer through a mistake, at least get the benefits from it on the other end. And I'm sure you learned something about mixing that particular bass guitar thing that didn't work on a boombox, that you can go back and look at something that's not right in your monitoring, a choice that you made, something that's not working that caused that to happen. Why did you not hear that? Why was it not obvious? What a huge opportunity to learn how to do something differently in the future and not make that mistake in the future. You will be a better mixer for it. So there you go. Okay, we got username Paul Therdisa Carpet Salesman. I believe that's the username. Okay, you mentioned that you use Pro Q4 for zero latency EQ on what the performer hears when recording, but what zero latency compressor do you use in the same situation? And that's a good question. I apologize that I didn't actually incorporate that. So, you know, a real easy grab is FabFilter C2, that compressor. It can just be an easy way to just quickly even out some levels and have them hear something more compressed. I find, you know, that particularly for singers, that they're very, very used to hearing compression in their headphones, and it can be really, really helpful in getting a good performance. Other ones that I like, the Waves, Chrysler Algae 1176 plugins. Those are really great, quick, easy grab. You know, throw on there, zero latency. Monitor's great for doing vocals. You know, there's a few good options for that. Those are the first that jump to mind to monitor, you know, while tracking, and it's just there to, you know, make it feel better while they're singing, and then after the fact you can change it. Yeah, sometimes those things end up working out, and you can leave it on there. If it sounds great, you can leave it, but, you know, switch to something else, either a hardware compressor or, you know, another plugin that might be more flattering, but you couldn't use in the moment while they're singing. So, couple options there that have worked for me. All right, moving on. Okay, and now I have more Lullaby stuff, and this is all from the website. Okay, so this is a tape machine question. So I recently bought a tape machine, and I was wondering if you use any kind of synchronization system for keeping the tracks aligned. I'm using one myself. It's a Rosendahl SMPTE, Rosendahl with SMPTE, to keep jitter as low as possible, even if Pro Tools is the slave. But it's limited to 48K. I'm wondering how you get to work with 96K projects, and if you do sync tape machines at all. Thanks a lot. Okay, the way I'm using tape machines now doesn't really require syncing the tape machine to the computer anymore, or vice versa, because generally what I'm doing is taking a signal that's recorded in the computer already, sending it to the tape machine, having the tape machine in repro, and recording it back into the computer, and then I just shift it forward so that the timing matches what the original source was. So I'm not really having to do synchronization, but I'll let you know what I use and how I approach that when I do, because it may come up at some point. I'm using Adam Smith Zeta 3 synchronization systems. I bought multiples of them because they're very old and, you know, not so reliable. I recently, before I made the move to Vermont, I had them all refurbished to make sure they're working great. And they really do work great. They're pretty uncommon. It wasn't as popular as like the Lynx systems. I'm not familiar with the Rosendahl. I've heard of it. I've never used it. Don't know how well it works. But whatever system you're using, this is what I settled on, because the computer's ability to chase SMPTE that's coming off of a tape machine, for some reason, has gotten worse, and I'm talking about Pro Tools. It seems to be a lot more picky about the stability of that clock signal that would get derived from the SMPTE code. And I was having terrible problems with having the computer chase the tape machine, and would get dropouts, and it would stop and pop itself out of record, and all kinds of problems. And so I decided, why don't I just do it the other way around? Because you can have, if you have a Sync.io unit, you can have the computer generate the time code, or you could even just put a time code, put SMPTE time code as an audio track in the session and have that just go to the synchronizer, have the tape machine chase the computer. Then you can have whatever sample rate you want in the computer, and tape machines are way better at chasing SMPTE time code than computers are. And so when I was in my huge archiving process and trying to dump every master tape I had in the studio back into the computer at 96K, it became a huge problem. And that was the solution that I came up with, that ultimately it was just getting impossible to get the computer to chase the tape machine, because some of the master tapes had all kinds of edits, razor blade edits in there. There's a little, imperfection in the tape when there's an edit. Even doing the best job you can, lining everything up perfectly and taping it, and being really great at editing analog tape, there's still an imperfection there, and that was causing dropouts or weird places where it would get out of sync and screw up. And so I highly recommend, if you can, send your SMPTE from the computer to the tape machine, have the tape machine chase the computer. Also, then your clock is super stable, no jitter. So, or as little jitter as you have in your system. Because definitely having the computer chase the time code is potentially problematic, because the time code is really not super stable, for not anywhere near the degree of stability that you would have with just a clock signal. So that's the solution I came up with. It ended up working great for, the whole, I probably made that transition about a third of the way through the process, and it worked great for the whole, back half of it. So there you go. Okay, so then we would love to see an episode where you actually mix a song from start, to see your mixing process and decisions live. Is that something you're thinking of doing? I would love to do it. I mean, I'm totally open to doing it, but that is a fucking slow ass process. I just can't imagine anybody wanting to sit through me going through that for hours on end. I don't know. I could set up a live stream with the audio from the computer and just be going through and doing it, and I could, make comments as I go and talk about it. I've definitely had plenty of times where I'm mixing in real time with somebody in the room, either an assistant or somebody that's hanging out. And I enjoy talking about it as the decisions are coming up and going. I'm happy to do that, but whoo, that's a long time, to be sitting there glued to YouTube or something. So I don't know. I'm super game to try it, but I have my doubts that it would really work in a way that would be super interesting for people, because it's 8 hours sitting there while I'm picking through plugins and trying stuff or screwing around, trying to get it. I don't know, man. I'm game. We'll see. Totally open to it. Okay. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention, that was from Johan Holm, username Johan Holm. This is from username Jordan Barnett, and they're curious, was the Chandler tube driver used on any of the original Third Eye Blind songs, or did that come later? Was it mostly distressors and Summit Audio and Orban EQ? Chandler tube driver, definitely involved, for sure. That I made that discovery maybe just like a year or two before I was working on the Third Eye Blind record, and was really obsessed with it. It was just one of those things. As soon as I put it on something, it was like, man, that just sounds, and this is mostly all drum stuff, like, whoa, that's just instantly cooler sounding, with this distortion on there. I just kind of breezed through and listened to a bunch of that stuff. It's all over that record, definitely, for sure. It's all over there, all over the snare drums on the Third Eye Blind record, for sure. I was so into that effect at that time, and so unquestionably on there. Orban EQs all over that record, for sure. On the snare drum, that trick. I also used an Orban EQ to do that weird sort of filter effect on the bass, on the beginning of Background. That bass intro, that's all Orban EQ creating that filter effect. So yeah, so those tools were in full swing at that point for sure. I was obsessed with them. So all over there. Okay, so here's a question about mixing. It says, how long does it typically take you to get the first pass of a mix done? Are you working on it continuously and then printing it, or are you taking breaks and doing it over the course of days, weeks, etc.? And this is sort of in general, I mean, it varies depending on the complexity of the mix, but in general, I like to do what I would consider to be the vast majority of the mixing in a day. So that's probably like 8 to 10 hours of mixing. And then sleep on it overnight, listen to it in the morning, listen to it fresh, and make some final tweaks in the morning. That's my usual routine that I like to do. So a whole day to do 95% of the mixing, check it in the morning, see if there's anything that I missed once I've slept on it. Sometimes while I'm sleeping, I'll wake up going like, oh, I should have done this on that, and do those last little bits of things, and then print it, send it off, whatever. From there, it sort of depends on how successful that first pass is. Sometimes people go, this sounds great, and then all I have to do is pull it back up and do the final print of it. Or sometimes there's multiple rounds of recalls depending on how everybody else is feeling about it. So, but that's generally the routine. A day of mixing, check it in the morning, print it. All right. From username Kev1N28, it says, when you're running tracks through the tape, is it difficult to get them to align and be in time properly with the rest of the diddle tracks in the section that are not going through the tape? So I've mentioned this a few times, it's easy enough to say again. There is a delay, that the tape machine introduces, and so I have a spreadsheet that I use where I've already sort of calculated what they show up as from the various tape machines I own. Okay, here it is. It's a sheet called Tape Machine Offsets. So if I'm using the MM1200 and it's set to 30 IPS, the session, the Pro Tools session is at 96K, it will, cause a delay of 7,910 samples. And so I know once I capture that signal back in, I just go to the little nudge window, the value for the nudge thing, type in 7910 and hit the minus key, and it just boop, moves them back so they're all in sync. That is close enough, like that number is sort of rounded to be close enough under any circumstances. That delay on the tape machine varies a little bit whether you're at the beginning of the reel or the end of the reel. It's related to how the speed of the tape can change from the beginning to the end of the reel, because the relationship of the tensions changes between beginnings and ends of reels. So, but all of that is plenty close. You'll be within, 100 samples or less of being totally phase locked there. So that's how I do it. Super easy. Just whatever the new thing is, just grab it, move it forward by the amount that it was delayed, and it works out great. Okay, so then we have, this is another one from same username, Kev1N28. Okay, one thing I'm curious about is why so much use of Soothe and Bloom? I feel like your recordings sound great. Without these plugins stripping out sometimes 15 dB of frequencies smack dab in the middle of the sound. Those plugins make me a little anxious, I admit, when treating vocals at least. Anyway, amazing videos, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, I recently made the comment. I said, I am a little conflicted about using these new digital tools that are these kind of like one button, just make my shit sound great kind of thing. I kind of feel like it's cheating, or I'm not really doing my job or something. And I certainly didn't need them a long time ago. I think Bloom is the one that's a little more conflicting because I just use the default most of the time. I just put it on there. It seems to even things out in a really great way. And if I've said it a million times, if it sounds great, I'll use it and not try to overthink it. Soothe is a little different because that really is a time saver. I have been doing things like Soothe for a very long time in a way less efficient way, and in a less detailed and musical way, I would also add to that. And so it was one of the reasons that I really fell in love with the Orban equalizers, because they allowed you to do such an extremely narrow surgical bandwidth on things. And I used to use those EQs all the time. It was that and GML EQs that I would keep around specifically for the purpose of going and notching out offending frequencies on things. And it was, I think at times got results that were useful. It was difficult and cumbersome. There was a lot of like tweezing around and trying to find it and do this stuff. And it wasn't dynamic for the most part. There was another device that I used for that. This BSS dynamic equalizer, but it never got quite as narrow as the Orban EQ. Its bandwidth wouldn't get that tight. And that was a dynamic equalizer, and I could target a frequency, or it's kind of like a range of frequencies, and I would use that to duck things down. So I was doing things very much like Soothe with tools that just didn't do it as well. And so, that's why I think Soothe is so useful for me, because I've always been chasing doing that, and it just does it better now. So that one, I have no hesitation about using that tool, and I have zero conflict about it. I think it's just brilliant. It's a thing I've been wanting to do for a long time. I wish I had it 30 years ago, kind of thing, But some of these other ones are a little, I don't know. I'm still not 100% sure that I'm comfortable with using them. They've been sounding good. When I put it on, I was like, I do like that better. So I'll keep using it. But we'll see. It might be interesting at some point, if I really, really get used to leaning on those things, to force myself to not use them and do it the way I used to do it. Because I'm perfectly happy with records that I've done in the past as well, Nothing wrong with those. So, I would be okay doing it that way too. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it evolves there. It's a very, very good question. Those tools are getting unbelievably powerful. Okay, so this is a question about that JBL speaker that I used as the sub speaker for the kick drum sound. And so they said, do you think you'd find similar low end in other woofers, or is it totally dependent on the woofer make model? I was pleasantly surprised by the low end of a random speaker I took out of a shitty old guitar amp and used for Subkick one time. In Matt Rad's Discord, Kian mentioned the double no cab within cab NS10 Subkick setup that you've done. Yeah, that was sort of, I realized at a certain point that the NS10 thing, that the speaker out of the cabinet wasn't totally great, and the speaker in the cabinet wasn't totally great, but it was the combination of the two that really worked. And so I did that for quite a long time. But I've done all kinds of weird experiments with that. On the Queen's record, I had this monitor wedge that I was using for the speaker Subkick thing, and it just happened to sound cool at that time. I don't even know where that thing is now. It's gone. I don't think there was anything uniquely magical about it, but the idea of using a speaker to capture low end seems to work really cool. And I mentioned this in the episode, but there's these things called Thiel small parameters, and if you match up those parameters, you can find a speaker that will do very, very much the same thing. And that JBL speaker is probably very expensive and hard to find, but if you went to a place like Parts Express online and dug around for some 15-inch low-frequency drivers on there. And I'm not really prepared for this, but I'll do a follow-up where I'll find the model of the JBL speaker. We can look up the Thiel small parameters, because I've done this before, and find a new speaker that's being made that's totally affordable, because you can buy 15-inch low-frequency drivers for $100, maybe $100, $200, that has very, very close Thiel small parameters to that JBL. When I built my sub speakers, sub cabinets that I paired with the Uri 813s, that's what I did. And I loaded them with these speakers that I got off of Parts Express, that were not expensive at all. And they performed great. They were very similar to the JBLs. So there's definitely a way to do this that's not unobtainable. So I'll follow up with more details about that and let y'all know if you want to explore that. Okay, so now I have one that popped up On the website, from the mixing drums video on there. So this is username Jim Keeney. And so they're saying at 3511, is this level crushed pair of room mics the same pair of room mics which you have gated in the track above? I had to go and look at the video and see what was going on there. And so, like, I didn't record this, so I'm not 100% sure, but I am 99.9% sure that, yes, they are the same tracks. And so the engineer, Ian McGregor, did this thing where he would take the room mics, print them in, capture them normally without an effect, but also capture a version that has his standard audio leveler thing on it. And you'd get that just super mashed, just like flatline, super dense room sound that he would just blend in as a parallel. And so I believe that what you're suggesting is accurate. It is the same exact room microphone signals, one without the level processing and one with. And then I gated the one that didn't have the level processing and then blended in the one that did have it. So yeah, so there you go. Okay, this is just a comment from username Mark Holly. This is from a previous follow-up video. And they're just saying, I'm really looking forward to hearing your opinions on the different tape machine plugins. I know you really like the Arturia one when you did the most for the least video, but I'm super curious your thoughts about other possible contenders. I've downloaded more. I've been comparing them. I'm deep in it on the most from the least part 2, just forming more opinions about it, and I'll be able to give examples of how they're stacking up. It's been really, really interesting, so I'm excited to share all that. Okay, so there we go. That's all I got. This was kind of a long one, but thank you as always for watching and sharing your thoughts and opinions. I love the feedback. The critiques are fine. I'm a big boy. I can take all of that stuff. It's only an opportunity to grow for me. As always, thank you for the questions, and thank you for those of you that have made the jump over to the website and are putting in questions there. It is getting a little tricky trying to pull together questions from all these different places, but I'm up to the task. I'll come up with a system for that. I'll make it easier, and I'll see you on the next one. All right, cool. Thanks for watching. Bye.